Welcome back to Thinking About Therapy.
In this week's episode, I'd like to introduce you to Christine Donaghy. Christine has been diagnosed with narcolepsy, and she's kindly joined me today to discuss her experiences of living with narcolepsy and the mental health impact of the disorder. I suppose I've been following you a little while on Instagram, and you've been kind of advocating for narcolepsy and trying to help people understand a little bit more about it through your own experiences. For anybody that's maybe not familiar, could you tell us a wee bit about narcolepsy or what it's like for you?
So narcolepsy is a sleep disorder, but it's also a neurological condition. And that means basically that it was caused by a brain kind of malfunction, if you will, a lack of hypocretin neurons in the brain, which are very much needed for regulating your sleep. What that means then is that your sleeping patterns are very irregular and you never really reach that deep quality sleep. So you're very, very tired because of that, and that means that you would fall asleep at inappropriate times. So it's actually because you don't sleep at night well that you fall asleep during the day. There's a lot of kind of perception that, oh my goodness, you must be great at sleeping, but it's actually the opposite. So then it's also, whilst it's also, a sleep disorder and a neurological condition, it's also thought to be an autoimmune disorder. And what that means is that it was caused by an immune response. So basically, your body produces antibodies to protect you. You get a vaccine, that's got antibodies or whatever, but the body actually got it wrong when it came to what the threat was. So like the flu molecule, for example, is more or less identical to the hypocretin. So it thought that the flu was the hypocretin, or the hypocretin was the flu, and killed that off. So that's actually how it kind of can come about, and that immune response can be, triggered a lot of different flus and sicknesses and things that people can get, and that causes it. And then it's also genetic. So there's a certain DNA strain that makes it more likely for people to have it. And then another thing would be that, they say it's 1 in 2,000 people, but they say also that the majority are undiagnosed, and that's primarily because people don't know how to recognize it. And sleep's just one of those things. People think, oh, everybody's tired, but they don't maybe know how to recognize when it's quite dangerous, or they need to address it.
Is it something that you think you've always had and it's taken a long time to be diagnosed, or is it something that you can develop with time?
I debate with myself about this because when I look back, at school and things like that, I was a very tired child. And my mommy was always like, if I had to leave for school in the morning, she would have had to have wakened me an hour and a half before. Whereas my brother, she'd be like, he gets up 20 minutes before and he's straight out that door before you. I always had to be prompted. I would have been, maybe got up, put my school shirt on, and then she would find me sleeping again. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I had different things. I was quite a sickly child, if that makes sense. Every year I would have been sick. And then there was also, I think I'd got a couple of things. I had a bad flu. I also had like chicken pox, I think, really late. I think it's like viral things can cause these sort of things. And then I also, and I'm going to teeter around this because I don't want to like get in any bother, but or encourage anything different. But so there's a lump of cases basically in the UK and wider Europe where when people got the swine flu jab, they developed narcolepsy. And again, it was just about that immune response. So, it's basically your own antibodies can do it, or like, antibodies that come into your system. And I don't want to say too much because, they were successful in court and stuff and actually putting a class action together on that. So I basically was more tired after that event, after getting the swine flu vaccine, but being like from studying law and stuff, I'd be thinking, evidence and point in time and all that kind of stuff. And I couldn't prove to myself. So I thought, I'm not going to court because yes, it probably didn't help, but it would have to be the sole cause and all this kind of stuff. So I was just like, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be accumulation of different things.
Yeah.
And
it sounds like it's very difficult. to actually pinpoint then, what point did it start?
Yeah.
And there are so many factors that could contribute to it that actually like being able to build a picture is difficult.
Yeah, because I was a teenager as well, and sure they were like, "Oh, you're just a teenager, you're just growing up." Whereas I think in those cases, a lot of them were children, and so like if a child is like not running around, bounced up and down, chatting at a mile an hour, that there's something wrong. If they're sleeping, like people had said more or less, they got it, and literally like 2 weeks later they were not the same child. So for a
Okay.
teenager, sleeping is normal. So then I think the point in time in which you get it as well.
I guess there's a lot of kind of misconceptions or kind of myths around narcolepsy and what it is and maybe what it isn't. And I suppose as somebody who has it, I wonder what maybe some of the most common ones you hear are, and maybe if we could kind of talk a little bit about them to try and, I suppose, dispel some of those kind of myths and things like that.
Yeah.
I suppose even from conversations that I've had about talking to people about you coming on the podcast, there's been that thing of like, oh yeah, like, you just fall asleep. Like that's the only thing that you have with narcolepsy. But I know from kind of, following you on Instagram and things like that, that there's actually a lot of other things that kind of come with
Yeah.
it. So like, would you mind kind of sharing a wee bit with us about what those kind of things can be?
Yeah. So even just to touch on the sleepiness part, the kind of name for it is excessive daytime sleepiness. And that's sort of the first symptom that they'll measure. Even whenever you're going to get diagnosed, they'll look at that first. So they would ask you to fill in a scale, which is called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale. And basically, they would ask you different situations, how likely it was to fall asleep. And then at the end, you get a figure. And then they would say, right, okay, your excessive daytime sleepiness is quite high. This is more indicative of a sleep disorder. They actually start with that first symptom. But another thing a symptom that is very indicative of narcolepsy is your nightmares. So basically, a regular person, regular people go into REM sleep, they call it, which is like a dreamlike sleep. It'll take them 90 minutes. Whereas someone with narcolepsy, you can go into that in less than 15 minutes. So if you're finding that you're sleeping and you're straight into a nightmare, that's quite, indicative that's not really normal. Like if I took a nap, I would go into a nightmare straight away. And like the nap might be only 20 minutes long. So the nightmares, extremely vivid ones, and then see, everybody gets a different variant, I guess, of narcolepsy. Not everybody gets every single symptom, but like nightmares, like combined with hypnagogic hallucinations, where you are actually dreaming about your room. So like you're thinking that somebody's coming in to your bedroom, someone like you can feel touch, you can smell sometimes maybe they're just auditory. You can, I sometimes would be like, Cameron, someone's in the house, and he'd be like, there's absolutely nobody in the house. So yeah, I mean, if you're telling someone your nightmares and they're looking at you like, I don't get nightmares like that. They're very different. And then the sleep paralysis as well, again, it can come combined, where you basically, I think a lot of people, would say it's like, when people say they get the horrors after drinking. That's sort of like sleep paralysis, where you you literally can't move. And your sleep paralysis is the state you're in you're not light sleep, but you're not quite wakened up yet, and you're not quite sleeping. So your eye is kind of almost flickering open a little bit, and that's how you hallucinate. You're sort of able to see your room a wee bit, and that's how the hallucinations coming in. You think the window's falling out, you think someone's taking the house down. So that's kind of, I suppose, them two are big ones. But if you didn't have them, for example, you might just have very, very poor concentration. You wake up every morning, you don't feel refreshed, no matter how many hours of sleep you have. Other things like poor short-term memory, like my boss always laughs at me because he's like, how many places do you write things down? I'm like, I've got a whiteboard, I've got a journal, I've got a to-do list. that panic in me for, and I've realized I've been doing that for years, even before I was undiagnosed, always thinking I'm going to forget something because I couldn't trust my own memory. And then the disruptive nighttime sleep. So maybe you don't get nightmares, and you think you're okay during the day, but your sleep, you wake up like every hour or two, and that's your sleep cycle being disrupted by the fact that you don't have hypocretin to regulate it. So you're not meant to wake up at 1:30, 3:30, 5:30, 7:30, and that would be an indicator.
Yeah, but as you say, for everybody it might be different, so different people might have a combination of those different things. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I suppose I'm mindful of whenever you say about the nightmares and things like that, that is it like every night that you would have those is it every time you go to sleep that, or almost every time that you go to sleep that you're having those kind of nightmares?
Some nights you get lucky, and it might just be an action film. It might be something that's very vivid, but you're not afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. So it might be like I'd be dreaming that I was back at school. School keeps coming up. I'd be dreaming I'm walking in the corridors, and I realize I've got an A-level exam and I didn't study for it. And things like that I'm not afraid of, but they're very vivid in that I could be like, I know I was in this classroom and there was a smell and I could see this person. They come in all different shapes and forms.
And during the day, they kind of, I think you've referred to them before as sleep attacks. Is that the right terminology? I
think they're all maybe micro sleeps is another. Maybe that might be the more common term. But yeah, I've got used to saying sleep attacks.
Are they something that you get every day, or does it? I imagine maybe does it depend on the sleep that you have during the night, or what way does that work?
I would say it depends. It depends on something. They would say your EDS level, your excessive daytime sleepiness level. But I take a nap now, so I do that in order to kind of prevent more sleep attacks happening, because if you don't nap and you haven't slept the night before and you're just going on fumes, basically, it's more likely that a sleep attack will come on randomly. But there's things that no matter how much you try to control it, there's things that, like heat, for example, if it was very warm, or you're in a situation where I couldn't stand up or move, like it's just going to happen. So
and is it something that you can feel like happening? Is it something that you know is coming on in terms of like a sleep attack, or is it something that happens like spontaneously?
Sometimes I know I'm very like aware, as in like it depends how intense the sleep attack is, if that makes sense. So like sometimes I'm like, okay, I really can't concentrate. Okay, I really can't. And then I'm like, how long have I been sitting here? And that's another symptom, brain fog, where you kind of have no awareness of time, and then you're like, then you come back into the present and you're like, oh, I don't know how long I was sitting there. But and even sometimes I get lost in my thoughts like this, and I'm like, that's brain fog. But yeah, you can. It depends how intense it is, and if it's really intense, you won't have much. You might know what's happening, but you won't be able to move. So sometimes I'll be like, oh, my concentration's bad, this is bad, and I need to go to bed. So like, you're better not to fight it, which I tried to do in the past. You cannot fight it. And then other times I might just wake up and be like, I'd be like sleeping on this book, on my desk, and be like, I don't even know what happened. So
it sounds like it's impacted by so many different things that it must be very hard to kind of manage.
It definitely is. It's I always say to people, I just feel like I'm carrying so many plates and I have to keep them all spinning at the one time, and I can't afford to drop any of them, because if I do, then I'm inflaming a symptom and I'm away sleeping. So it's this element of not feeling in control, like that is very difficult to come to terms with. But I suppose there are things you can only do your best, within what you know and your knowledge and things. So yeah, I can talk a bit about management if you want.
Sure, yeah, that would be helpful for anybody that maybe, yeah, I suppose it's just helpful to hear. The thing that with the podcast, I think, is that it's about educating people who have no idea maybe about what narcolepsy is, but I think one of the things I found from the previous episodes I've done is actually a lot of people with, for example, the episode that we did on OCD, a lot of people with OCD started to listen to it as well because they were finding things that were helpful or not helpful from Dean. So I guess it might be helpful. Obviously, we know that everybody's going to have to learn to manage it like differently, but it might be helpful for people to learn a little bit about what you've done in terms of managing it.
I think, well, keeping within the theme, mental health support was definitely something that I actually, which is funny, I kind of knew myself that I was quite a wee worrier and quite anxious, but I never sought help for that. I only sought help when I thought it was making my narcolepsy worse.
Okay.
So I think I started to notice if I was getting annoyed about something, but then it's like the chicken and the egg. I never knew whether, and I still don't know, would I be anxious if I didn't have narcolepsy? Am I anxious because I've had to, always have this thing that I always felt like I couldn't let slip, that kind of way. But yeah, mental health support was important for me because even just for someone to be like, it's okay that you feel like this. It's very frustrating that you have a condition that is very rare and not many people know about it. And, you can get really angry. Like, I think definitely it would be very easy to let it change you into a different person just because, just feeling very by yourself. But yeah, that was really important. It's not going to solve it. It's not going to put the hypocretin back in my brain, but it's definitely important because you go through something that is so, like, just, in terms of dreams and them hallucinations, like nothing you've ever seen in this world, and you just don't know. Sometimes you wake up and you're just like, someone actually who was narcolepsy said it's like having an emotional hangover, where you're just like, what was that? So and I actually as well, some of the themes in my dreams were anxious things as well. So like that thing about school always appears in my dreams. I don't know why, but like I just have this thing about exams, I think, and I that's even quite an anxious thing, feeling like unprepared, or that something's going to happen. But anyway, so that's that I do really recommend speaking to someone. And even if you don't speak to a therapist, like speaking to like groups of people. There's a lot of like Facebook groups, and they're really good because see all them people in that group, like not every single person, but I've actually met a lot of people through that, and they understand more than maybe like your best friend. And it's not that your best friend is trying to be hateful or anything. It's not that. It's just they fully get how bad you feel and what you've tried and what you haven't tried. But that, and then nutrition's another thing. But it's hard because the way it goes in terms of like coping is, number one, get diagnosed and medicated, because without that you can't make the next step up. It's sort of like nutrition is very, very important, but you need to kind of take the first step to be able to get medicated so that you can get back up to a baseline level of coping and being able to deal with life. It's a lot to ask someone. You need to fix your exercise, your nutrition, your mental health all at once. It's like literally, and that's a perception too, by that kind of the fitness world, that you fix 50 things and then you go away and do your January diet. I just think yeah, number one, don't be hard, like as well, don't be hard on yourself, and just take it day by day. And then routine is very important, because you need to take your nap, kind of like a child that doesn't want to go to bed. Like, it's hard at the start because it's not natural, but if you can take that nap, you can take back a wee bit of control and know that that you've removed maybe a certain trigger.
What I was thinking from what you're saying, like what you said so far, is that loss of control really kind of struck me when you said that, actually, that you can do a lot of things to try and manage it, but it sounds like there are times where the narcolepsy can just fully take control and you don't have that kind of choice in it. And I suppose I was thinking about the impact of it kind of on your day-to-day functioning, or like on your ability to like attend special occasions, or even like that part of you that said sometimes you can be quite angry with it.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like a lot of this, there's a lot of secondary things that come from having narcolepsy. And I suppose it's also learning to manage all of them as well.
I definitely, it's really frustrating. Like, you can read all the self-help books you want, but it just is frustrating, whenever you plan a day and it doesn't go how you want it. And you can really, um if you're not careful, it can really, really take a massive hit to your self-esteem.
Yeah.
Like, for me, I mean, that period of time where I wasn't diagnosed and I was doing exams in uni, and then within a professional working environment, that was a dark period for me, because you didn't know what it was, and you just thought that you were stupid, because you must be, you're putting in so much work. And that way, even, if we take it back to even school, I was always overcompensating, and like, I'd be like doing everything to the nth degree. And my mom, I was like, why do you be so stressed whenever your marks are fine? But I'd be like nearly crying, being like, I have to do double the work to get, even like, I still did okay, but it was just kind of like, it was the stress of always feeling that at any moment that you're going to slip up. And that, yeah, and then that kind of realize it, or that kind of fear coming true via that kind of professional environment. Because what happened there was, I didn't have time to overcompensate, because the schedule was very tight. So I had to work 9 to 5, then I had to study, then I had to go to class at weekends. So there was no time for me to cover up, and it kind of just got blown out then. And so yeah, that hit in the self-esteem. And it's I mean, everybody in life wants a kind of a vocation, and like, my job and career is and was and is very important to me. So to be kind of derailed in that way by a condition that you can't control is very, very frustrating. And just knowing that you can do it, but your body's just not cooperating with you. So yeah, the loss of control, the self-esteem, and let's see, the nightmares are, they would make you question your sanity. They are just the things that I have seen in my nightmares and hallucinations. Like, they're like horror film material. They're, if I was to recount, I don't always tell them to people, because I feel like I would actually traumatize that person. And sometimes it's about people I know, sometimes it's people I've never seen. And that helpless feeling again in your nightmares, where you just are like, I don't want to be here. So and then, so that's a big thing. But I think, from even in terms of management, if anyone was listening with narcolepsy, it's really important to ground yourself when you get up, and just like draw a line. Like, that's over here, because some days I get swept up on it, and I'm at 3 o'clock and I'm sitting going, I'm still like almost traumatized, and I'm like, what was that about? And like, oh my god, that was so scary. So that's one thing. But another thing, the isolation part, very, very frustrating to feel like, something is wrong with you and nobody is taking you on. Like, even though now I've been diagnosed and I'm being treated and whatever, I feel like sometimes I'm still a wee bit scarred from that, like people not believing you that there was something wrong, mainly GPs. And just feeling like, oh my goodness, everyone thought that I was so lazy, or they just didn't understand, like, and then but there was something wrong with me. And even though I know that now, I would say, like, that was difficult. And then, and on a positive point, those narcolepsy groups and things, they're a great way. And like, there's like a mantra, basically, narcolepsy not alone. And like, it's amazing what you can find out from them groups, and be able to connect with people that are exactly like you. Like, that is, I don't think anything can beat that, because it's just like, I will like a weight off your chest, because you're like, I'm not, the only person with this. And actually, what I say about my nightmares and all is resonating with someone. That is just really powerful. And even with therapy and stuff like that, I would still encourage people, like, to talk to other people with narcolepsy. But at the same time, there's two different kind of groups. There's one group that really doesn't. Obviously, there's two states of mind. There's one where we have it and we just have to kind of deal with life, whatever, how much of life we can live. Whereas there's another half that just really isn't interested in any of that, and they're not interested in reading anything to do with like how to cope or anything like that. They just take their meds, and that's fine because it's different severity levels too, you see, as well. So I mean, I can't chat about it to somebody who, maybe can't leave the house because they're cataplexy. That's another element of it. There's two types of it. Their cataplexy is very severe, so I can't be all of them. Sure, go exercise. And they're saying I can't even get my foot out the door. And like obviously as well, people are different phases of coping with it. So you can't be like, somebody might be like, still at the anger phase of like having it, and there's no point. You just need to let everybody just needs to process that at their own time.
I think that's really important what you said there, actually, because I think that's a good point you made earlier about, you can have like a best friend or a family member who's doing all that they can to support you and to try and understand, but actually there's a bit of a relief in maybe speaking to somebody who you actually don't have to explain some things to. They already get it because they're going through it themselves. And that's what you kind of get from the group element of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I suppose that kind of validation of how you're feeling, and that like, oh yeah, I'm experiencing it too, without having to get into the nitty gritty and trying to explain it to somebody. It sounds like that must be a very powerful thing to have that connection with somebody in that way.
Yeah, it is very empowering, because you're like, right, okay, this is, and that's the reason for that, and that's the reason for that. So, it's good to be able to get it straight in your own head, because even before that, I didn't really know how to explain it to people, and I was very like bashful, whereas now I'm like, I don't have any qualms about telling somebody what it is. And I probably wouldn't be like that if I didn't talk to anyone else, because I still would be unsure and feeling like, oh, I don't really know what this is.
And I think that's part of the reason, like, for inviting you on the podcast, is actually I think we probably don't know. I suppose I'm struck by the amount of people that are undiagnosed potentially with narcolepsy, or I had said to you that I've had a few people who've been referred to me for psychology. The referral has come through and has said, this person has sleep difficulties, and could you do some like sleep hygiene with them, and that it's their sleep that's affecting everything. And actually, when we get down to it, it's we're not talking about what the general population experience in terms of sleep difficulty. We're talking like an extreme in sleep deficit, actually, more than anything. But that there's so many emotions wrapped up in that being misdiagnosed with it, or people, that not being heard or not feeling like you're being listened to. And I think you're right. Often maybe people don't really know how to explain it or how to put the words to what they're feeling. And having been knocked down so many times, then they feel like, I don't really know how else I can say this.
Yeah.
And I'm still not being kind of listened to, or it's not being recognized. And I imagine that's a very frustrating part of the whole process in terms of a diagnosis.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely, in terms of like dealing with it, again, you can do all the therapy and things like that, but you do kind of be hit sometimes by a bit of anger. But I have tried to form that anger into something that's useful rather than just ranting to everyone that they don't understand me. They don't know what this is. But that kind of confidence factor of just someone shooting you down, or even just somebody saying, oh, just dismissing you. And that's very difficult. But the anger part, it's just, for me, emotions just make me more tired. I'm not trying to cut off my emotions, and obviously feel your emotions and all that, but it's just like, you would just be such an angry person if but it's reasonable to be angry, I suppose. For me, I just thought, I don't want to be like, I don't want to turn into a really angry person my whole life.
I think you've got a really healthy attitude, as you say, trying to use that anger for like channel it into like doing something positive with it. Like, it's not everybody that would do that. So that's to me that's a really healthy way of looking at it, and acknowledging that you are angry too, but then saying like, I'm not actually going to let this take over everything.
Yeah, because people were like, oh, you started this blog and all, like, that's such a good thing. And I'm like, yeah, really angry. they, they don't actually, and they're like, oh, that's really nice. And I'm all, yeah, it's just to keep myself like from screaming sometimes because it's an outlet for me because I know that I need to do something with it. And yeah, that was actually, it wasn't such a like lovely rosy way to begin it, but that's the truth. Like it was just, I was getting really, I think I had a couple of encounters with people and I just was like, people do, like I just couldn't get over that they didn't know what it was. And it's not even that I couldn't get over it. I think it was even when you would tell people what it was, they'd dismiss you. So I started realizing that the public perception was really bad. And then that was driven by films and things. Like they think it's like Rat Race where you fall asleep in the middle of the road. It's not that.
Yeah.
So you can't really blame. And then I started to understand, they just don't understand. Like it's not, they're not trying to be hateful. They just educate, like the awareness and education isn't there, and no point me getting annoyed if I'm not trying to educate people in some sort of form. Difficult one to manage.
And have you found kind of through doing like the blog and stuff that actually it has like helped in terms of your own kind of emotional response to it?
I think definitely feel like every blog post that I write, I release a little bit of like annoyance. So I think like I for years was obviously raging about this, really getting annoyed. So every blog post I write, I do feel like I cope a wee bit better. Definitely. I think writing is quite therapeutic. I've made a few friends like through like my Instagram, and what I call, one of them like sent me a present this week just because she knew I wasn't having a great week, and that was just like so, I was so like taken aback by that. So yeah, definitely I think the blog, it's just an outlet really, isn't it? It's just I didn't really want to be sharing narcolepsy stuff all the time to my like Facebook, like it's sort of a place where I'm like, well, if they follow me, hopefully they want to learn about it. Hopefully, maybe it might help somebody. I mean, if it only helps one person, I'm not looking for like hundreds of thousands of followers. That's not really my aim. It's more it helps one person not feel as alone, or even helps maybe somebody who's like a mother or their daughter has it, like whoever it is, just have a wee bit more understanding. But no, it affects everything.
Yeah. And I think like obviously I'd said to you like I've been following for a wee while, and I think that's what I found is actually, I only know a little bit from my work about it. I don't know an awful lot, and I know that everybody who has it has a slightly different experience. So for me it's helpful to actually see and hear everybody's experiences, but it also means that if somebody comes to me through my work that has narcolepsy, I can actually say to them like, they could go and look at your blog or your Instagram page and follow you there, because there's something about trying to connect people with narcolepsy to be able to like, and even being able to say like there are groups and stuff like that. And maybe one of the things we could do is like in the podcast show notes, I can put in a link. So if you were okay to kind of share with me some of the groups that you've maybe came across and stuff like that, that might be helpful for anybody then who has narcolepsy to know that those things are there.
Yeah.
Because I do think there's maybe sometimes some people might feel very alone with it.
Yes.
Might be helpful.
They do, yeah.
As well. But I think you're doing a great job in terms of being able to share with, and being very honest with people about what it's like. And I suppose, as you said there, it sounds like it's a little bit therapeutic for you, the writing kind of side of things, being able to like, okay, vent sometimes if you need to, but also like educating as well.
I think sometimes I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing this for. But then, it's funny because sometimes I'd be very reluctant, or like, I don't always put up like stories or anything on my Instagram, because I was always like, no, I'm just going to operate under this name and no one's going to know who it is, and I'm going to write these blog posts. But then sometimes when I do like a video maybe that I think is completely irrelevant, someone will go, oh my goodness, I'm the exact same. So I suppose it's worth it. Me feeling a bit embarrassed is maybe worth it, because if it can help anybody. The groups are good, and they're actually always on point. See, when it comes to the latest research on medication, and if they are on it, like, so even when it comes to things like, I remember I was waiting for ages, to get the sleep consultant and sleep studies and things, and like they'd be like, oh yeah, it took me this amount of time and I'm in this hospital. Like they actually would nearly be better in terms of like updates and times than ringing the secretary. So it's definitely the loneliness element, and I suppose that element of thinking, oh, that must just be me, that there completely invalidates your experience, so that you can't even get off the ground to even get any treatment. But once you're presented with, no, I had this as well and whatever, and no matter what anybody says, you can't fake a narcolepsy diagnosis. So, if anybody's being like, oh, sleep and whatever, you just have to remember they don't know no better. They don't know anything about sleep disorder. Don't be taking how you should be treated, or maybe should I go see somebody about that? Just go see them, because it doesn't matter what everybody else says. The only person that is a good authority is your sleep consultant. And that's another thing. The GP, I would take like a Epworth sleepiness scale, and even just say a very high number of EDS, and just show them that you know what the symptoms are. Yeah, misdiagnosis. Maybe you were chatting about that, how your clients were misdiagnosed and then they had narcolepsy, and then they were sent to you for secondary symptoms as well. So how did they eventually, did you refer them on then to get diagnosed for the...
Yeah, in one of the cases I had kind of done like a psychology assessment with them, and what we seen was that yes, sleep was a problem, but it was so disproportionate. The lack of sleep, the sleep deficit that they were having was like beyond what somebody who would come to psychology with sleep difficulties, for example, would have. Like we were talking, we were like, that excessive daytime sleepiness was a big thing. At the time, I didn't have enough insight to know that that was even a scale that I could have given them, that I could have sent them back to the GP with. I just knew that what they were coming with was more than just somebody who had sleep difficulties. And I think often for me as a psychologist, when somebody comes with sleep difficulties, it's usually due to anxiety about something, or maybe there's like a bit of trauma in their history or something like that. The lack of sleep tends to have quite a clear psychological cause. And when I'd done the psychology assessment with this person, we were saying like, actually, do you know what? They're kind of, they don't have any kind of psychological difficulties. The source of the problem is the sleep, and the sleep is then causing them to miss things, or to feel like they can't get things done, to feel, and as you said there, that kind of like having to plan excessively or work twice as hard to get something done. But I suppose the root of the problem was the sleep.
Yeah.
And so I did like a psychology assessment with them over a few sessions, and I had kind of said, I think maybe going back to the GP and speaking to the GP about that, and kind of looking more at your actual sleep and what might be causing those problems would be better. And so they did that. They went back, had a GP who was very open to kind of what I had suggested. And I don't know what the process was for them from there, but they then went, and I assume had different types of assessments. Were given a diagnosis of narcolepsy, and it was maybe a year and a half later that they were referred back to me, having, as you said yourself there, actually having been diagnosed with narcolepsy and been given medication to deal with that. But then they actually went into a phase of being very anxious about the narcolepsy and not knowing how to manage it, really. And so there was a bit of work alongside the other kind of professionals that were involved in them in terms of how do they manage it. But it was very much that working then on the anxiety in terms of not leaving the house, or just different things like that, so it was a bit of back and forth, which is actually, I say, it should be sometimes, not just a one or nothing.
Definitely. I do think that, you go to your sleep consultant. Even now, I go to my sleep consultant. He knows everything about my narcolepsy. Then the GP doesn't really know as much as he knows. So then, and then he'll refer me out to, like, one of the things, what was it? I think he just refer me for like a female health panel check, because the actual sleep consultant is more cognizant of things like blood, iron levels than the GP would be, because the GP doesn't understand the impact for a person of narcolepsy to have low iron. So it's about that. There's no like 360, approach. But no, the mental health aspect, like anybody with any chronic illness, mental health aspect is so important. It's like just knowing that you're not going mad. You're not going mad. That's actually a condition. And in terms of like, so that someone like thinking it was depression and then being referred back, I think I can see why they thought it was depression, if that makes sense, because if someone's depressed, they might be sleeping a lot, but it might be because maybe they're avoiding life circumstances, or they don't feel motivated to do anything. Where I suppose the distinction between depression and narcolepsy is that even when life is going well and you're happy as Larry, you're still sleeping. So you might be like 100%.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I had picked up on that assessment that I had done with the person when they came in. They were kind of saying like, no, like if you fix like the sleep, everything else is fine. Like I don't have anything else going on for me, you know.
Yeah,
And that's very different to somebody who might come in with depression or anxiety, and is their sleep is a side
yeah,
effect of that anxiety, and depression is part of it. Like it's not, um, and I think when I was thinking about that lady that I had seen, there was also an element of like, although it was good, and I think a huge part of like you said there yourself, like the mental health aspect is getting the validation that actually
yeah,
you are not going crazy and you are being heard and listened to, which is hugely important in any sort of like physical or mental difficulty that you're having. But it was the secondary impact of that then, as I said, like her not wanting to kind of leave the house because she didn't quite have a handle on her narcolepsy yet, or not wanting to be left on her own because there was almost like that, I think that loss of control that you were saying there. So she didn't feel like she was in control of what was going to happen. So she felt that she wanted somebody with her all the time.
yeah. And I mean, that's even from a safety point of view, that's there are people that have to have someone accompany them whilst leaving the house. And I know for me, I definitely have felt that. I wouldn't get the bus anymore because like I've had so many incidents where I have been got on the bus in city centre, and then literally woke up and the bus was turned off, and the bus driver was literally about to close the bus. And I've had so many incidents. Like I used to have my sister ring me near enough every day to be like, "Where are you at now?" And it's kind of like one of those things. It's like you can have a fear, right? But it's like an irrational fear. But that sort of thing, it's perfectly rational sort of for you to have that fear because you have the evidence from the past that it happens. So that can be very difficult. Like going out and things. I mean, see things like concerts that would be sitting down, or musicals, or anything like that. Like I've fallen asleep during musicals, during comedies, and like I remember one time my boyfriend was sitting there, and he said he just felt these girls staring like from his like left, and then he kind of looked at them, but they were actually staring at me, who was on the other side, and I was sleeping. So then he had to kind of be like, come on. But that feeling of people staring and thinking that you're drunk. So when you're not. And it's, yeah, there's the kind of aspect of thinking, oh my goodness, I don't want to fall asleep anywhere inappropriate, or have people stare at me. And then actually it's quite dangerous too. It's if you're not outside the house. Like I had an incident where I was in my apartment and I was making soup, and the last thing I remember, I was on my feet, I was looking at the soup, I was stirring it, and I woke up and my apartment was filled with smoke. And like I don't know at what point that I sat down that I fell asleep. I must have sat down, which then is the worst thing because then you just fall asleep as soon as you sit. And my neighbors were like hammering my door, and the neighbor just was like, have you been drinking? Like we thought you were going to burn the apartment building down. And it was that, like, I was completely dazzled because I'd just woken up, and I was kind of like, what? And she was like, you must be drunk, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not drunk. Like, and I was so speechless because I was so freaked out for the fact that it could have been, a lot more sinister. So there's so many elements like that where you're always watching yourself too, and that's almost and it's like a slippery slope, for managing narcolepsy. You want to identify certain triggers if there are any, or you want to keep a routine, but then there's being almost so obsessed to the point that you feel like you can't have fun because you think that, oh well, if I go out tonight, then well, I'll be in for it tomorrow, that kind of way. Or if it was a wedding, for example, it's not even such a happy occasion causes me a lot of stress because I'm thinking, right, I'm going to have to nap at some point. Okay, are we staying down? Okay, if we're staying down, then I'll nap before the meal, after the meal, whenever. Um, I remember there was a wedding I was at and I didn't stay down. I was staying down, but it wasn't in the actual venue. And I didn't really know anyone at it. And it was awful because it was just felt like this pressure like behind my eyes. And I think I went to the toilet and just set my head down. So, there's a lot of organising like that. And with the driving too, there's a lot of organising that even though you can drive, you're very wary, about it.
And I suppose, yeah, what I'm hearing from that is like the amount of preparation and kind of planning that must take at times, and then the anxiety that perhaps comes with, as you said, like kind of, you want to track it and see, are there any triggers, or plan your routine around that. But it might mean that you feel at times that you can't be very flexible around things, and that must be frustrating. Like there's an awful lot of emotion in it. And then I heard you say earlier that like emotions, it tires you out then. So like it's kind of like a vicious cycle.
I know I don't want to like self-diagnose myself or anything, but I do whenever I read about highly sensitive people or well, I'm certainly a person that's very empathetic. So, if I watch something, I'm like feeling the person's pain. Not everybody's like that, I discovered, but I wish I wasn't like that in ways. I'm like, oh my goodness, like why do I have to absorb so much? Because it does just tire me out. And I would notice things like even it's wild funny looking back over my life and thinking that's what that was, or like even my family, or I have a massive family, and I would go away, after visiting and be like, I am exhausted because I just while a lot of chatting and while great to see everyone obviously, but I just be so tired because there's so much going on and so many different emotions flying about, and everybody's trying to talk at the same time. And and then even when I was younger, when we used to get visitors, I used to hide, and my mum would be like, "You're being so ignorant, come down and speak to these people." And I'd be like, "There's enough I'd be like, there's enough people in my house, like I can't be dealing with this." Like my mom, you should always find me, upstairs, like in a random place, like reading a book or something. And that was, well, not only like being tired, but that was like the introverted side of me. That even though I was in a big family, I was always kind of not forced, but I could chat. But actually, whenever I came away from it, that's not the natural way I wanted to be, if that makes sense. I preferred my own space, which was not, which was light on the ground with 8 people in one house. So yeah, it's a lot of planning, a lot of different emotions. And I do think, yeah, mental health support's very important because you just feel such a range and it does make it worse. If actually my consultant, I remember one time I went to him and I was saying about the medication. I was like, it doesn't seem to be working. And he says, is there anything going on in your life? And I was like, well, I'm moving job and I'm moving house. And he was like, right. And I was like, oh, what? And he goes, well, I'm not going to adjust it because I think why your nightmares are getting increasingly bad since X time to this time is because you are, any time in a narcoleptic's life that's a big event, that's going to make it worse.
Yeah, like learning about those different changes as well that are actually going to impact you. I suppose that's maybe part of that planning, like knowing that actually, okay, say for example, if you are moving house and jobs at the same time, that in the long run, when you start to learn those things, you might manage like, okay, I'll do one at a time rather than both at the same time because it's going to affect me.
Yes, it's learning all that. And I'm going to say another thing that Brené Brown always says: boundaries. um, Boundaries are not really, and I don't know if it's an Irish thing, but it's not really on us. It's not really, you don't just turn people away from the door, or you don't tell people that's not suitable. Sure, you just call whenever, and it's just not a thing. I don't know, maybe it isn't an Irish thing, but I found that actually me being such a people pleaser was not working in my favor. Because, and I don't mean I ground, being confrontational or anything like that, but now I'm very like, that doesn't suit me. Whereas before I don't know, I would be like, oh yeah, I'll change my plans and that just to suit you. Whereas now I've I suppose it's a good thing for me personally, because maybe I would never have maybe put any boundaries in place, but now I'm like, I have to think, I put narcolepsy first in ways, because I just have to remember I'm not being selfish. It's just, that other person doesn't have that, and their whole 2 weeks won't be thrown off, whereas mine's very easily could be. So realizing that you're not selfish, you're just trying to manage your health condition and live your life.
I think you're right. I think it is a very Irish thing as well, where we don't say no, and we just will like reschedule our whole day because somebody has asked us to do something.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think that's right about boundaries. So I think that's a hugely important thing, not just for yourself, I suppose, thinking about anybody with any kind of chronic illness or like mental health difficulty. That's often one of the things that I find as a psychologist that we work on is boundaries, and actually learning that it's okay to say no at times, and that it's not a selfish thing, or it's not said, it's about how you say it. Like, you're not saying in a cheeky way, being like, no, I'm not going to do that. It's actually saying like, actually, I can't do that, because in your case, for example, as you said, I can't do that because it's going to affect me for 2 weeks time, is different than just being like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But I don't think for whatever reason, well, it must be a kind of cultural thing. We're not very good at saying that.
Definitely not. And we're great crack and all, and we're so nice and we're so friendly, and we'll bend over backwards for anyone, and that's a great thing about our culture. And I would never want to, take away from that, but I know it's definitely, it's very, and it's, the weirdness too of being like that. But, even I think one thing that's very hard is, your family and you, and then kind of dealing with you being kind of having a different approach, and to kind of, as you say, saying it in a nice way. You're not saying it to be cheeky, or you're not saying it to be hateful. You're literally just trying to survive and manage your condition.
Yeah. Do you think having narcolepsy has had an impact on the people around you?
Yeah, well, the first person is anyone that lived with me. It had an impact on, because even before I met my boyfriend, like, my old housemate would have had to wake me the odd time, and then she'd be like, what's going on? Or you'd be tired, and then she's like, you're still sleeping, oh my god, you're going to be late for work. Just things like that, having to kind of sometimes say to someone, can you just like check if I'm awake? And they're like, well, you have alarms? And I'm like, yeah, I've got like 5 of them. They're not really working. Can you just check on me? So I've been very lucky, I think, to date, and the people that I've met, always seem to kind of look out for me a bit. I always met really nice people, which was I was really lucky to do so. But sometimes, your friends need to know that, again, it's not you being antisocial or unreliable. It's just that you have this thing and you can't control it, and that can be hard. You need, the friends that I have now understand that. They're quite like me, and that if someone cancels a plan, that's okay. Can be rearranged. It's no problem. There's no drama. So that's, I can't be involved. I can't deal with drama. But to be fair, I think I was always like that. But then sometimes that caused me trouble, because I didn't maybe take a side of someone, or I just wanted everyone to be friends. I couldn't be bothered, that sort of way. But now probably the person that affects most is my boyfriend. When I'm having them nightmares and I'm waking up in the middle of the night, I would like call to him as well sometimes, because you're half awake, you're aware that they're there, and you're like, Cameron, trying to get him to his attention. So it affects him. I mean, his sleep terrible as well, and he doesn't have narcolepsy, but he may as well, because it's, well, not exactly the same, but he's disrupted in the nighttime because I'm waking up loads, and even just sometimes I could be crying, like I could just wake up crying and things like that, and that's hard for him to deal with even.
Yeah.
So I think it affects him the most, to be honest, because everybody else, yes, maybe I can be grumpy with somebody, but nobody sees it like him, because he's just, even when it comes to cooking and stuff, he would do most of the cooking and stuff, just because, well, he loves cooking, he's better at it, but my concentration is pretty bad. But I try to help where I can, but it can actually be very hard on a relationship. I think when I was narcolepsy conference in Manchester last year, I think it was like a really high number. I think it was like well over 60% said it affected their relationships. And if that person does not understand that this is out of your control, then it's going to be difficult, because they need to be understanding, because but then you can, from the flip side of that, it is hard to have someone that maybe can't do all the household things all the time, like they're working too, they're trying to manage the best they can, and you know what, they have bad days too. So it's not always easy, but kind of understanding that it's not in their control, and just being able to have a chat, and just explain that actually boundaries with them even is important. Sometimes I might say to him, if there's nothing, no noise up there by 3:30, please come knocking. And then that affects your independence too. Sometimes I'm independent, but as much as I can be, but then sometimes it is hard, that you feel like sometimes you're annoying someone, but you're not, but you preferably like to just do everything yourself. So
I think that's important what you said there about that understanding being there in terms of relationships. And I think you're right, actually, if you can set boundaries in all of your relationships, it sounds like that'll be helpful, but not always easy, I suppose, as we've said. Is there anything in particular that you think I haven't asked that is important for people to know?
Maybe the driving.
Yeah.
So another reason why I started raising awareness was because basically, right, so people that are undiagnosed, unmedicated, they're driving around and they don't know that they have the sleep condition, which is quite terrifying, because when you think of narcolepsy, they say it's like a person being awake for 3 days solid. And I was reading one of the kind of sleep books I have, and they were saying basically that if you're awake for more than 19 hours, that your blood alcohol, it's comparable to a blood alcohol level of 0.1%, and you're likely drunk. So that is terrifying. Your reaction time, there's all these ads on TV. I don't know if they do as much of them now, but there's a lot of big campaign definitely when we were younger about drink driving and things. And I'm like, oh my goodness, there's nothing about sleep. And people, talk about sleep deprivation, but I think that is something that is really scary. And that being a wee bit angry, and obviously wanting to raise awareness, but also being conscious of, like, there's people driving around unmedicated that are actually basically drunk. And that sounds really bad. I don't mean to be drastic in saying that. I suppose it's a safety concern that I can drive now because I'm medicated, and I know what it is, if that makes sense. So if there was ever a day where I was feeling a bit tired, like, more than usual, I wouldn't drive. But it's the awareness. They don't have the awareness that this is what it is, and that terrifies me. That.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid point, that, like, as you said, knowing what it is, if you know what it is, you can know or work to respond to that.
Yeah.
And if there's a lot of people out there who don't have a diagnosis, but aren't, and medication again, but I think you're right, that's a huge kind of risk, not just like for everybody, for literally, like, who's on the road. And it's not being dramatic or drastic about it. I think that's just being honest, that actually, we know there's an awful lot of people who are out there undiagnosed, and you're right, they're getting into cars, or you mentioned earlier, kind of like, maybe they are living alone, for example, and there's risks in terms of that they're cooking and things like that. All those things are all those risks that are very real.
I know, and I think that's how awareness maybe might, sometimes there's a perception that somebody has this disease or chronic illness or whatever, that doesn't affect me, but actually it does. If your son or daughter was out driving and someone crashed into them, and you find out that they had undiagnosed narcolepsy or a other severe sleep condition, you would be like beside yourself. So it's that thing that sleep affects everyone, and I believe that it should be in law that there should be penalties. And then, because people at the end of the day are only working to what they can, like, I don't mean like in a horrible way to penalize them. I just mean, like, they're not taking it seriously, or like their employer is maybe saying, oh, you can only get paid by the mile, say for a lorry driver or something. So, like, people are incentivized to work more and sleep deprive themselves to make money. So that's not their fault. So then I'm like, right, well, it needs to go from the top down. It's big companies, government, they're the people that need to change, because at the end of the day, people are just trying to make a living. Like, it's not their fault. They're not given the allowance to sleep for so many hours before a shift or whatever. And yeah, it just affects everything. Work life and
Just as you're talking there, one of the things that I'm struck by is how often I say to people who come to therapy, because often when somebody is like anxious or has depression or has been through some sort of trauma, their sleep is affected. And often before we can do anything else, the sleep is the thing that we try to tackle, because when you don't sleep, it has such a knock-on effect
yes,
on everything that you try to do, like on how well you all the things we talked about today, like concentrating, your emotions, like your ability to deal with like day-to-day things that come up. So I suppose I'm thinking, yeah, like that is, there's kind of, I don't know if you've ever heard of like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like on the bottom, you have to be safe, you have to sleep, you've got to eat, you've got to exercise, like, they're called basic needs, but actually they're such important needs. And they tend to be the ones that go first, whenever there's something wrong, like mentally or physically, kind of with us. So yeah, just I suppose it's just thinking about the importance of sleep, and as I said, that knock-on effect that it has on everything. And how often I say that, because I think I say that to everybody that I work with, how is your sleep? And if it's not okay, then that's what we need to work on. And I suppose I'm really kind of trying to empathize with what it must be like to be living with that all the time, with such a deficit in sleep, because I know it's not just what I'm saying to everybody, it's for you, it's a much more extreme version of that. Like,
it's hard because some people are like, sleep wise. You see some people going, what career would I go into? Because I don't think I would be able to handle, there's a lot of kind of feeling like they can't do things because of it. And for me, I think it was just the timing I got diagnosed, because if I had maybe been diagnosed a wee bit earlier, then it might not have impacted my career as much. But it was because it was slap bang in the middle of when I had just graduated, and I had all the symptoms, but I couldn't get the diagnosis, and I was misdiagnosed with sleep apnea. And it's trying to basically keep going and just tell yourself that yes, there is these limitations, and it's not me that's the original person that said this, it's somebody else, which I can't remember their name now, but they basically said, I have narcolepsy, but narcolepsy doesn't have me. And it's living your life in a way that you don't want to limit yourself and put yourself in one square box. You want to kind of honor the fact that there is that there, but it's just recognizing the limitations but not becoming them is it's hard to navigate. And for me, like, I like talking to young people sometimes, and like we have different meetups and stuff, and like I remember someone saying, oh, that's really good, you got through university. It's hope is a big thing, like thinking, oh my goodness, I have this condition and it's incurable and we have this for the rest of my life, and how am I going to deal with this? But I think other people give others hope, that you can lead a life, and it might not be identical to someone else, but that doesn't mean that your life isn't worth it. And that is another thing with narcolepsy. There has been people, unfortunately, that it was just too much for them. They just, and it's hard, because you recognize that it's hard, and you don't want to be toxic, like toxic positively, like, oh my god, this is great. But it's sad, that like there was a girl, sadly, that passed away, and she was training to be a doctor, and when she found out she had narcolepsy, basically she was like, this has derailed my career, I can't do it, and that was it. And that's so sad. I find that so sad, so
I think that's probably like a good thing for us to be kind of ending on, in terms of that idea of actually that people need to have, that you can learn to manage it, and that actually that message of, you can find a way to work with it. And what you said there about not letting the limitations define you is a really important part of it. But I think from what we've talked about and from what I know from in terms of people coming to see me, I think one of the ways that you can generate a lot of hope is through more awareness, exactly what you're doing. Sharing experiences, like validating how everybody's feeling and giving each other a bit of hope, because I have no doubt that there are absolutely days where you must feel very overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
But that's when it's so important that you have a network of people around you who can give us that hope. We always say in kind of therapy, for anybody who's ever feeling down, it's my job as a therapist to kind of hold the hope for the person until they can feel it for themselves.
That's really nice.
But actually, I think that's the idea behind that connection, is that you can all hold the hope for each other. Like, this is a bad day, but it will get better. And if you're on your own with it and you're not feeling heard and not feeling validated, then you're not going to have that.
Yeah. Feeling like that feeling of being helpless, or that there's no path forward, or maybe that there's days where I've been there where I just feel like, I can't believe this is the way my life turned out, or this has happened to me. But there is hope, and there's always I always say to people, I don't always say to people, but you don't let one short term difficulty define your long term outlook. And it's not short term, I don't mean it like that, but I mean, like, there are always going to be bad days in narcolepsy. I mean, there's a lot of bad days, but the good day, there's good days there too. And it's definitely, I just think that element of hope, and even just chatting to people, like one of my friends that I chat to, and we chat to, what we like in our friendship is that we both have narcolepsy, but we chat about normal stuff. So it's just that I want people to see that, people that have a chronic illness or narcolepsy or whatever it is, they're not just like over here in a separate box. That could be you. And the population for, they talk about minority groups and things, but like disabled and chronic illness population is a population that anybody could become a part of tomorrow. So just for people to, I suppose, even for myself, it's like learning that empathy before it actually gets bad, happens to you, if that makes sense. Just to have kind of that awareness of other people can just, even just somebody saying, I have a friend who sent me a message going, I can't imagine what that's like. It must be very hard for you. That's not even, a whole paragraph or anything, but I can really, even someone trying to reach out to you can really make a difference.
For anybody who wants to kind of follow you on Instagram or find out a wee bit more, just either for themselves or they're just interested in terms of awareness and things like that, what would be the best way, or where would they be able to find your page and things?
So my Instagram is a bit long, so it's The Girl Who Ran Away in Her Sleep, and then the website with the written blog is thegirlwhoranawayinhersleep.com. So that's where you would find my pages. And then if you wanted to look up any narcolepsy resources, there's Narcolepsy Ireland, and then there's Narcolepsy UK. And then if you search either of those within Facebook, you'll find them, request to join them, and the person lets you in usually.
I'll put a link to those, as I said, there's the kind of like the show notes. I can put a link to those at the bottom, your own pages and those kind of groups as well, for anybody that's interested.
Okay, great.
But thank you so much for your time and chatting with me. That was really interesting to just find out some more.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.